Welcome to today's Gaggle webinar, everyone. We will be focusing on educator well-being today. I'm Paget Hetherington. I'm the VP of Marketing here at Gaggle, and I'm going to be moderating today's events. So it's been quite a couple of years for all of you and all of us, to say the very least. Our guest speakers today that we have with us are going to share with all of you some ideas on how to go forward this next school year. You know, many of you have already started the school year just in the last couple of days, and you know, as the next couple of weeks go forward, we're all going to be back in school. So the focus here is, you know, taking care of yourselves as well as each other and as well as all of our students. We want to focus on, you know, how we can all grant grace to each other, to our students, and to ourselves. And then in that, how we can actually build more hope going forward into the future. And let's make this school year the best we've had in a long time. So that's what we're going to try to talk about today with some different ideas and strategies from our two speakers. Before I introduce our speakers, I want to just go over a few housekeeping items. You will see in your Zoom webinar panel that at the bottom you have a Q&A icon and a chat icon. We'd love to hear from all of you in the chat. Let us know where you're coming from. And throughout the presentation, let's make it a conversation in the chat. Tell us what you're thinking. And we will get to that as much as we can during the Q&A section at the end. So definitely let us know what you're thinking, what your questions are, as well as in the Q&A icon, you can also add your questions. And we will get to those during the Q&A section towards the end of this webinar. So thanks, we really appreciate your participation. We will be following up today's webinar with the recording of this webinar, so you don't have to struggle and take all sorts of notes, as well as the slides. So we'll be getting that out to you early next week. All right, so now I'm going to get us started by introducing our two wonderful guest speakers. Very pleased to have with us today, Dr. Lisa Stroman. Dr. Lisa Stroman is a psychologist, an attorney, an author, a mother. Lisa Stroman established her Digital Citizen Academy, which helps families keep safe from online dangers. Dr. Lisa, as she's affectionately known on her website and in her social media, is also the author of several books focusing on this topic. Dr. Lisa's background working as a visiting scholar with the FBI during the Columbine attack has inspired her passion to proactively prevent and educate students, educators, and parents on issues related to technology, social media, etc. So welcome, Lisa. And then we have also with us today, Angela Myers. Angela is an author, an educator, speaker, and entrepreneur. Angela founded the global movement, which is termed Choose to Matter, and is dedicated to helping individuals see their value and potential. She has authored 9 books, and her work has been shared in over 78,000 classrooms around the world to empower more than 1 million students and many educators. Okay, so those are our two speakers. Just to set the scene a little bit here before we dive in, this past academic year, so the 21-22 academic year, Gaggle's data, you know, because we have a lens on what kids are talking about and thinking and feeling based on our student safety service that we provide. Gaggle's data for this past year revealed more incident alerts to districts for student suicide and self-harm than ever before in Gaggle's 23-year history. So pause there. I mean, it's huge. The whole issue with the student mental health crisis is continuing. It's a pandemic in and of itself. And it certainly is affecting educators as well, which we're going to be talking about today. 25%, for example, of educators have reported experiencing symptoms of depression this past year, and only 1/3 of school and district leaders increased staff availability to mental health services. So with all of this, only 1/3 of the schools across the country were able to increase mental health services. So I just wanted to kind of set the scene there. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, please share them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as possible today. So without further ado, I'm now going to hand this over to Angela to get us started. And she's going to kick it off and also show us a short video. So Angela, over to you.
Hi, Paget. Thank you so much for being here, and thank everybody in the community or that will be a part of this conversation. I could not pick two more important words in the theme of our focus for next year, with the statistics that you just shared and the things that we are living and breathing in our daily lives. I think there's no more important concepts than grace and hope, and they go together. One of the things that I think gets confusing about hope, because we use it so nonchalantly, like, hope you have a good day, I hope hope it doesn't rain today, is that hope is a very complex action. It is not an emotion. And part of that action in hopeful individuals and hopeful organizations is not a dismissal of the past and just like, well, we're just going to forget everything, forgive everything, and move on, and it's going to be rainbows and sunshine. That is not hope at all. And I love this. This is sort of our flow for today. Hope honors the past. It acknowledges the present, but it dwells in the possibility of the future. So in that spirit, one of the things that I think honors what we have been through collectively, and Dr. Lisa is going to speak about the role of collective trauma versus individual trauma, is a project that Edutopia engaged in about 1.5 years ago, and asked teachers just to call in to share their present moment right now. And I think the collective voice of our fellow educators is still, even today, 1.5 years later, extremely powerful in a way of acknowledging what we've been through individually and what we've been through collectively. So Paget, can we share just a little clip of that?
I don't think we're hearing the audio on that.
And of course, we heard it perfectly in the
I
prep.
know.
So,
I know.
But what's our theme? Grace. So we're going to give ourselves grace.
All right.
It's definitely worth hearing. So we'll try it again and see
Try
if
it
we
again. I think we just need Emma to turn on your audio to probably hear it, I'm guessing.
I can't do this without getting broken up. This year has been the most challenging, but the most rewarding. And I'm so proud of all of us, teachers, administrators, students. We couldn't have done it without each other.
America's educators are stronger and braver than you think. If we can make it through this year, we can make it through anything.
Angela, over to you. You're probably on mute.
I am on mute, of course. The total video, which we can link in the show notes, was over a compilation of 8 hours, I think, of teachers just calling in and sharing every emotion and every impact, and it is definitely worth a hear. So if you just type in, "It's been a year at Edutopia," you'll get to the video, and it's definitely worth seeing. So thank you so much, Paget, for sharing a little bit of that project and for taking a moment, even if it's just a moment, and saying we have had a year and then another year, and now hopefully not the 3rd year, but it's real. What we've been through is real, and what we've been through is unprecedented and different. And Dr. Lisa's gonna go into that just a little bit more. So I'll pass it to you, Lisa.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think I would like to first thank all the educators that are taking the time, whether they're here live or they're watching it, because their lives are too busy with the crisis that's happening. But I think that the voices that we hear are probably not surprising to those of us that are on the call today. The state of our educator mental health obviously is what we are concerned about. And for sure, Gaggle has always been the group that has ensured that if they're trying to take care of the kids, then we also need to spend some time taking care of the teachers and the administrators as well. As a clinical psychologist, it's striking to me that we are at a place in history where we have at least 1 out of 4 of our providers in education struggling with mental health. And the 2 that we picked out were depression and anxiety. And I do that because I think it's important when you put in some ancillary data that if you add in some of the statistics that you have nearly a 20% increase in alcohol consumption among educators over the last year, if you have also the statistic of that 53% of them have considered leaving the profession. I think if you listen to the Edutopia, that there's a lot of teachers that really for the first time in history weren't loving their job and were feeling that there was too much on their plate. And so obviously that's going to lead into depressive symptoms and having anxiety. And anxiety disorders from a standpoint of a clinical presentation are something that kids pick up on, right? So if you have an anxious teacher, then you have an anxious classroom, and then you have anxious students. And so like we really do have to slow down and recognize it's super important to get where we need to be is to like stop and put our oxygen masks on first and really understand what that is. So let's go into why this is such a crisis. I think that from me, this unprecedented trauma that we are starting to see is basically the tsunami that started two years ago, maybe 2+ years ago. We've got a bunch of things that happened at once, but if you look at kind of a shared global trauma, which is different than an individual trauma. So when you have the same events or series of events that happen to a large number of people at one time, that's what we talk about as a collective trauma versus one person goes and gets in a car accident. It's really easy if that teacher returns back to school and they're on crutches for the rest of the teachers to kind of come and surround them and give them what they need in terms of healing and energy and support. But when you're in a system of collective trauma survivors where everybody has been impacted, some more than others, but that there isn't really any free souls out there that haven't been impacted by it, then we've got an issue where we've got this cumulative loss, cumulative grief process, and you have this culmination of anxiety and depression. And I think that we don't have the balances that we once had in the educational world. And so that's why we're facing the unprecedented traumas. And I think that the families that sometimes would come in, the communities that would sometimes come in and bolster our educators and our system also are dealing with traumas themselves. So it's really kind of a system that has created literally a paucity of support for everyone in the world. And so education is no different than that. So let's talk a little bit specifically on the shortage that we are facing, just so that we can see. Paget mentioned it, that we've got a real difficult road ahead of us, given lots of different things that happened. And obviously for the administrators that are on the call, it is clearly something that to look at the issues of funding and where monies are allocated and where are we putting COVID dollars and all those things. So I don't think that in the conversations that I've had, and probably in a national level, at least 5 to 7 systems nationally, and I'm sure Gaggle and their 1,500 school districts, like there isn't really dollars that are usually set aside for teachers first. So we've got to kind of look at the educators as this group of where they need the support. Over COVID, I actually took on to graduate students, PhD students, mentored them to allow them to do group therapy for the educators, because the school system, quite frankly, were referring them into their employee benefits programs, which is difficult and hard and those kind of things. So from my perspective, how do I get, therapy to the educators at that moment? And so we just did Zoom group therapy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was something. And so I think that when you look at the shortages that they have, we've got to kind of think outside the box. Angela and I are going to talk a little bit about that later, some solutions for your for your kids. What we have as our national standard in the educational world is one psychologist for every 500 students, one social worker for every 250 students, and one counselor for every 250 students. I will tell you that I run a very busy clinical practice. I see a lot of teenagers, and in my clinical practice, I do not carry more than 50 people at any given time, because the emotional stress and challenge it would be to be able to be proactive and supportive in that session, in those sessions, would be fundamentally too difficult. And so some of the things from a legislative standpoint that when I put my other hat on is an effort to try to help change that for all of you, because I think that that's really a challenge. If that's all you're getting for the kids, even in a coffee room, they're not going to have time to have conversations with staff. The students that are coming in, to me, the 7.7 million have a diagnosable mental health condition. I would say from a global perspective, that's really low. But again, that goes back to diagnosable, meaning somebody's actually looking at them and assessing them. So we're not even hitting the students that are being assessed. And so you have to think through that. If our teachers are already stressed and dealing with their own trauma and recovery and trying to figure things out, and students are coming in and they're not mentally stable, or they're having their own challenges and struggles, what they're learning is to come into a teacher or a situation where they need kind of a safe space. And so that's really what today is about, is like, how do we create and kind of work with you and trying to support, how do we create that hope? Because it's doable. We just have to think about things differently and be a little bit more creative in how we go about it. And then finally, obviously, this is no surprise to anyone else, but distress is a huge issue in our families. There's a ton of people during the COVID period that passed away, elderly. I have the top 10 leading causes of death. My husband's in family medicine, and so he's got this big graph. And we lost a significant amount of people to COVID, but that didn't stop also losing people to cancers and to other things that were impacting them. And so you have to think through, like, all of those families are coming back. And again, what do we need in a collective trauma? We need other people that are stable and supportive to be able to meet us there. And we have not had that. So our families, those are the ones that we usually lean into in educational systems to be our PTOs and to be our folks that come in and bolster our day by bringing in gift cards and sending notes of appreciation and gratitude. And so that's probably diminished significantly, given the fact that they're kind of trying to just keep their heads above water. So the shortage is real. We all know that it's here. I know that between all of us, that there's solvable problems, and we can all come together. And Angela is fantastic at that. I'm going to hand it back over to her as we talk through some of the things and jump into how to get to care.
Thank you, Lisa. One of the themes or the things that is so intriguing about your research, because we've both been looking at trauma for decades, is the idea of collective trauma is a whole different animal to think about, because it requires collective well-being. And what I noticed and what I have been a part of in terms of handling trauma during, especially with teachers during the last year and a half, is self-care has been absolutely put on the forefront, as it should be, and emphasized. And so I just want to clarify the difference between what we do individually and what we do collectively. So when we talk about self-care, what we're emphasizing is personal and individual actions. It puts the onus on the person going through the trauma. It encourages us to cope with the impact of our circumstances, and it does very little to challenge what what caused those circumstances and what structures were in place that possibly could increase the stress or trauma. So that's not a bad thing. That's part of being human. Human beings grow in their strength and their courage and their resilience when they go up against challenging situations. So that's part of our personal development as human beings. And there should be some onus on that. But what I struggle with in self-care is that it has the potential to become another added stress on top of the stress that the individual is already feeling. That yes, maybe going on a walk or maybe, building yoga or meditation or breathing, that those are beneficial. There's no doubt, and there's research behind any self-care things. But when you don't have the time, when you don't have the resources, when you don't have the wherewithal to build those structures in your day, it ends up being another thing on our list. Like, oh, I didn't take a bubble bath today. Oh, I didn't go on my walk today. And it just spirals the stress. So I want to present what I believe is a very hopeful solution to, not a magic cure, but a solution to address this in something that I call community care. Community care allows people to pool their assets, to collectively going after making sure that no one feels unnurtured or unseen and unheard. It recognizes that we as individuals don't necessarily have the time or the money or the wherewithal to engage in self-care rituals and sustain that. So we might in the very beginning take some time off or pamper ourselves or take a break or even be more bolder about saying, I need to have a day off. But I'm looking at sustainable impact. Can we keep that going for more than a week, for more than a month, for the entire year? That's a lot of burden to put on the individual. So community care addresses the needs and gaps that happen with individual, that happen when life shows up. That we have, that, I've said for decades, we are smarter together, we are more powerful together. And I now believe we are more healing together. So community care, it isn't one or the other, it's both of them. And I want to share just a little bit, if we can go to the next slide, just a taste of what community care did for me personally, because I known about community care, but never actually experienced it. So during the height of the pandemic, I go to a gym that is specifically for women, and it's a small group. They have multiple classes a day, but it's probably 500 or 600 moms from all walks of life. And we have this collective, this collective commonality that we're trying to handle being mothers and handle our own individuality. And when self-care was brought up, there was a lot of discussion in our group about how stressful self-care had become for us. Like, some moms had 3 kids, some moms had newborns, some moms were dealing with X, Y, and Z. And this would be the same for dads. This would be the same for any individuals. It just happens to be in my circumstance. This was a group of mothers. And so we looked at, let's try something different. How can we support each other? How can we collectively ensure that no one in our group goes without the nourishment they need, the rest they need, the connections they need, the acknowledgement and support they need? And that was a really big thing. So we set out what was to be a 3-week challenge. And we got in groups of 4 people, and I'll talk about the group size. We got in groups of 4 people that had a common need of what their current life, what their present looked like. So if you had newborns, you might go to that group. Or if you had 2 toddlers or kids under 5, that's a different kind of stress than a newborn, and not sleeping and all of that. So we grouped ourselves by our common needs, the places we need nurturing and support most. And the goal was to find a group. We named our group, which gave us some sort of identity. We named our group, and we were committed to each other's healing and to each other's help and grace for 3 weeks. That was it. And whatever we decided to do as a small network of supportive community members was dependent on what our needs were, what our specific situation, what our now was requiring. So I thought, well, it's 3 weeks. I'm just going to try it. I mean, there's nothing that can go wrong with that, right? So the first thing, as we started talking, because it takes a lot of bravery to actually ask for what you need. We all recognized we were stressed. We all recognized we were worried, not just about our kids and our family, our world, our community, but actually we could see parts of ourselves being in danger as well. And so we thought, you know what if we started every day in the 3 weeks just with just a positive message of grace, no matter what happened the day before, no matter what you feel you failed in or were not enough. What if each of us just texted each other and just a morning message? And we did that. And when that first week came, it was nice the first day or two. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I found myself waking up to these little messages like, oh my gosh, that it just changed my day. And that I counted on that, and that I screenshotted those and I shared those. And it was something so small. We call it micro action. So it's just a micro action. It took us 3 seconds a day, and it was only out to 3 other people because our group was 4 people. It was only out to 3 other people a day. So we didn't carry the weight of the world on our shoulder, but we thought about these 3 people. Another interesting fact is that we didn't know each other. We were all a part of this gym and community, but we went to different classes at different times. So it was just, kind of safe when you didn't know each other and you weren't brave enough to say, this is what I really need. So as the 3 weeks grew on, we got braver and more articulate and bold about saying exactly what we needed, whether that was food prep or whether that was like sharing a way to give ourselves a 30-minute break and cool our kids. And none of the actions that we took in the 3 weeks were like grand. And for some other group, they might not have made any sense or relieved any stress. But for our specific group, and over time, not only did these women become my friends, but I grew to feel responsible for them, but not in a burdensome way. And it was such a phenomenon that it has now been a year and 3 weeks that we have continued. So I asked the gym manager, just out of curiosity, just like data of all the groups, because everybody did it for 3 weeks, of the 500 or 600 people that belong to the gym. Of the data that happened, how much do you estimate that people still kept their community care group? And she said, I bet, she said, I'm not accurate or anything, but just talking to people casually, I believe 80% of them have probably kept some sort of connection or support to their 3 community members for over a year. And that is what I'm talking about. If I asked moms in the group before, how many self-care routines have you kept up consistently, ritually, without compromise, no matter what outside circumstance, for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a year, I would see that number probably be less than 5%. But community care was really, really different. So Lisa, does that surprise you, the dynamics between how we support each other individually and how just a group of really strangers, because we didn't know each other, they've changed my life. They've changed the way I look at care. They've changed the power that I feel to be hopeful and to feel like I can give other people hope. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, not surprising at all. I think that, again, the world in education specifically probably gets that more than anything, because you're a special support network for one another in those scenarios. And in my world in clinical psychology, the first thing that I look at is, what is the social support network? What are your connections into the community, and how integrated are you versus isolated? So it makes perfect sense. And it really a tribute to you to get that going and have that community built around you.
I definitely attribute it to my gym leader, because the owner of the gym, because I never would have done that. I think as I reflect on not only what we're doing for each other currently, but what made this so different than any other kind of group that I've been a part of, whether it is my teaching colleagues, whether it is that have been matched to me because of my job or because of my grade level or because of my circumstance. This was random yet not random grouping. And I was absolutely more open to letting those three amazing human beings show up for me, because what it really did is it made me show up for myself, because I knew that they were counting on me. Our entire sole purpose for being together had no other connotations or no other connections or layers. Our entire purpose for being together was to care for each other, was to make sure that every single day, not a single one of us felt not nurtured, not cared for, not validated, not respected. And underneath trauma and the research on trauma is trauma heals only when you are in a relationship where you feel seen, heard, validated, and respected. And we did that for each other in the smallest, weirdest, most simple ways. And we didn't want to give that up. I get why we didn't want to give that up.
Well, I think, and that's a good segue to go into the, maybe like move into the principles and practices, and then invite anyone who's listening. Oh, that's your quote. Invite anyone, if you have questions or thoughts or concerns, we're going to jump in a few slides. We're going to get into the Q&A. So feel free to jump those in as well.
Going back to the first quote I shared, hope is about not only honoring the past, but acknowledging. I think just finding our group, we acknowledge what our present circumstance was. This might not be permanent. Our kids change ages, the circumstances and context of our world outside changes, but this is our now. We're going to acknowledge the stress, the challenge, the struggle of now, but we're going to work together to dwell in the possibility of the future. So if we can go to getting started, the slide. Oh, we are on that.
Actually, no, the community care. Before we jump ahead, I was going to say, like, the asset allocation and division of efforts, like starting there, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, like, this mom group came together, whether it's teachers coming together, whether it's watchdogs or the dads come in, like, make the campuses safer, Gabgle coming into communities and caring. And in fact, I think there's a really good blog that we did coming back from summer, which is on Gaggle's website. Maybe somebody could put it in the chat, but there's a link in there that gives suggestions from A to Z on stress management and coping. And so, like, if you have it and then you share it, and it's something that you can, like, then implement and give you ideas on what you can do. So that's a really good resource in that. But and that would be something that, as an example, that you could do that divides the efforts by spreading the wealth of the information.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The thing, if I look back, that I wish we would have done is we did not know what other groups did for each other, because it is a very vulnerable, brave thing to tell somebody else, this is how I need you to show up for me. This is what I need for this coming week. It may be just small, but I just need you to wish me good morning every morning, or I just need you to do X, Y, and Z. It's so, and it changes every week. It honors that our now changes every week depending on circumstances. So if we could move to the slide of getting started, I want to help you guys just, or maybe not help is the wrong word, but to challenge you to think about for 3 weeks, just for 3 weeks, try to pull together your own community care group within the context of your school or your even your neighborhood, your community, to just get the experience of what it feels like to know every single day that there are at least 3 people in the world that their entire energy and goal is to make sure that you're okay. And by saying that, I don't mean that your teaching colleagues or your significant others or your children or your family don't prioritize that. But what I know is that we don't ask them in the way that we might need to ask them, because we don't want to burden them, because we know their story. Another example, I just recovering from surgery, and I spent last week being completely dependent on other people. And I probably reached out to my community care group and felt more comfortable, because I didn't want to burden like the people that were already loving me and caring for me. It was just such a really weird phenomenon to go through, because I know that that's what that group is for, where my significant other or my family or my children, they have other roles in my life. They have other contributions in my life. And that group was put together for the sole purpose to contribute to my well-being. It's just been such a new, profound phenomenon. So here's how you can get started in just dipping your toe into the concept of community care. You are not abandoning self-care. It is not one or the other. You are integrating the knowledge that both serve different purposes. So one of the ways to get started is to think about what I would say your commonality. It would be to figure out who in my community has the most in common, because when we have things in common with each other, it creates an immediate bond. Even when I had never met the ladies, I'd never actually done a class with them because they were at different places, but we had this the commonality of now. This is what my life is now. These are what the challenges are now. And so that is, if I go and put that same criteria to teachers, a first-year teacher, even at the same grade level, is going to have a different now than a veteran teacher. A teacher that is teaching, multiple classes versus a teacher that has all the students at once. So the important part is to just discover commonality. What are things that describe my now, so that we can do that matching up. And then I was really struck by the power of a throuple. And by a throuple, I just mean 4 people. That it is not a couple and it's not a threesome, because it releases the burden during our year, not our 3 weeks, but during our year together. My throuple, my team, different things happened in their life where some, like they went on vacation or they were out or they had a sick child or something happened and one dropped out. And we still stayed vibrant. So if that was just the third person, it puts this pressure of having to be there for someone else. So I think, I'm sorry, a throuple, 3 people. So it just takes off the pressure. So 3 or 4 people is what I think is a really good group. And then I think the third part is more internal, is that you have to be brave enough with each other to communicate your needs. And so we started very meek, I would say, like, just wish us a happy morning. Just say, this morning is a do-over. Whatever happened yesterday, you have grace for that. You weren't the, perfect human, the perfect mom, the perfect everything. It's okay, because today, new day, and we're starting over and we're here for each other. So it started with just a greeting before we did anything more intimate with each other. So it took weeks, I think, to be brave enough to say, oh my gosh, I need this. And during my surgery week, I was really brave because I was completely incapacitated to do anything on my own. And to ask people for that, I don't know if I would have had the courage to do and say, I actually need this. I really need this so I can recover. So we met face-to-face one time, and everything else, we've never seen each other face-to-face without like formally, without in passing, for the last year. So we brainstormed a list of needs and a list of micro practices, and we just picked one a week that we would commit to for each other every day that week. And it changed week to week. And sometimes we went back to, you know what, can we do the good morning messages again? Because I don't know, my mornings are starting out very frazzled and very whatever. But my challenge to you, or my invite to you, is try to find that group. Community care, I believe, is the ultimate act of self-care, because when you commit publicly to showing up for other people, you are committing to also taking care of yourself. So that is my challenge for you. I would love to stay in both Lisa and I are on social media to see, like, hey, we did this for a couple weeks and it made a difference. So I'd love to see what the outcome is. And again, 3 weeks to try something possibly different, or a different angle to something in addition to the self-care you're doing. You have there's very little to lose in it. So Lisa, what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I think it's really great, like that you set that time aside intentionally. I think, again, like in the education world, it's hard because everybody's so pressed with like meetings. And again, I love the fact that you said that these are micro intentions, because I think that that makes things easier. And it's really more about the intention of checking in. This is the wellness training for staff and students. Like, you know, you could look at something like that and say like, oh, this is yet one more program I have to do. But in reality, it really isn't. It can be these micro trainings, these micro conversations and intentions that we add into just our system so that it actually creates support. I think that all too often that we're siloed and we're not really reaching out. To your point, we're not talking about our mornings need help, but those micro intentions of being a better person, helping somebody else, understanding somebody may need more grace than they did the day before. I think, to me, I look at it and I say that you have to be aware of where you are, that self-awareness piece that you talked about, but you also have to have some awareness of others and have that ability to dedicate time and intentions to them. So I love it. I mean, I think, again, this is going back to the basics of bringing everybody together in that community care model, which is the school, the family, the community. And you also said something about people, you wish you would have known that other people are doing that. It's interesting to me that in the world of the nonprofit world or in community partnerships, whether it's with churches or whether it's child care programs like Boys Girls Club, or we have a Boys Hope program here, all of them really amped up and created all of these amazing programs, but they didn't have the ability to connect to the schools, or they didn't have the relationships in order to create those things with the schools. So sometimes it's just slowing down a little bit to find your community care and figure out who do you reach out to. And that goes back to leaning in on those people that you can trust to do that.
Absolutely. I think that's probably, if I looked at the hardest part of this process, it's finding that commonality. It's finding who your group, who your throuple is going to be, and then committing, like having a structure that we're going to text each other, we're going to, whatever you want, we're going to see each other, we're going to text each other, we're going to Zoom or whatever. I truly believe now, because I've experienced it personally, that authentic and lasting transformation comes from the practice of community care, because you're not looking for perfection or checking off a list. I did this, and then when you don't do that, you feel bad. It is about authenticity. It's not about these fleeting moments in time of compassion, but this like rugged vulnerability and empathy that we give to all. Your community is out there and they are waiting to love you. There are people that are waiting to love you, to see you, to accept you, to hear you, to validate you. And whatever intention or action, or whatever action comes, that's the intention behind this group. So whatever we can do to each other, for each other, to turn that intention into action, we owe it to ourselves to take that first step. We deserve that. And if we are of the mindset that we are not going to give up, we are not going to give in to whatever outside forces are trying to like knock us down. And that's who we are as teachers. That's what I got from the Edutopia video, is like, no matter what, we still are going to show up. We are not superhuman. We need each other. We went through this trauma collectively. I am imploring you to go through the healing collectively. You don't have to handle it all on your own. That is why we exist, for each other. When we show up for other people, it changes who we are inside. It's a miraculous biological phenomenon that is truly stunning.
And one last thing on the community care, I would say, is it's interesting to me that the teachers that are new and younger in age tend to be less open to sharing, even though they grew up in more of a digital world of like where they are quote unquote kind of connected at all times. It's almost this piece where you have to present yourself one way on social media, and I'm not going to get on a soapbox, but that there's the kind of this training that has been occurring that we have to only present our best self, and that the struggles and the blemishes and those things shouldn't be shown. So I think that it's really a tribute to this community care that you must be willing to be vulnerable and open if you want others to be able to lean on you so that you can lean on them. And so there's some retraining a bit that may happen. And you may see from an age standpoint where your teachers, not necessarily how many years they've been teaching, but maybe how immersed they are and trained kind of from a subconscious level on whether or not they should be presenting all of this information and leaning in to get help. So just something to take into mind. Yeah.
No, absolutely. My text to my community care group last week, the beginning of last week, was, I'm a hot mess and I need you. I don't even know what I need right now, but I would not have done that. Like, I did not feel guilty about that. But I didn't call my sister. I didn't call my mom. I didn't call, because I know that they have other things on their plate. And it isn't that our group doesn't, but our group's entire reason and purpose for gathering and being together is to be there when one or more of us, it feels like we're falling apart, or even partway falling apart. So I seriously cannot emphasize exploring this in any way. We made up the structure, so there isn't a huge amount of research that I know on the perfect structure for things to happen. So there's no perfect way to group. There's no perfect agenda, but you figure out who your group is, who you have your now in common with, and find ways, small micro ways, to show up for each other. That is it in a nutshell. So I can't wait for you to experience this kind of relief and support, and just knowing that there's 3 other people in the world right now that, for no other reason, or not because they're connected to me or related to me or working next to me, are showing up for me when I need them to show up. It's a beautiful thing. It's why we are created. So I would love to hear what you think. Dr. Lisa, we would love to hear your questions, like bring them on. Paget, anybody?
All right. Yeah,
specific
we're going to
questions?
do that. We're going to do questions now, everybody. Thank you both. I mean, fascinating and so interesting, this whole concept of community care. And as you were talking, both of you, about it, I was thinking about, the actual subject of this webinar is granting grace and having hope. And I think this concept of the community is about helping each other by granting that grace when people are having issues with whatever the thing may be, right? So it's just giving everybody a little bit of a break, right? So anyway, I thank you both for that. We have a few questions that have come in. So I'm just going to go through those, and we have about 10 minutes. So I don't want to, I'll just take a couple of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So this is kind of a broad question. I'm going to ask both of you. So either one of you want to jump in first, but generally speaking, what lessons do you think that society in general has learned about the pandemic during the last couple of years regarding well-being? So kind of in the theme of all of this, what have we overarchingly learned? That's a word.
Well, I can jump in from a clinical perspective in my practice. What I think I guess the analogy might be that if you kind of get an injury or you get sick or something like that when you're unhealthy, in an unhealthy state, and it's a lot harder to heal from that. And I think that when people neglect their well-being and their mental health, and in a proactive way, and then a pandemic hits, it's twice as hard to pull yourself out. So I think that, I would hope from a global perspective that we've looked at that and said that instead of being so reactionary to our mental wellness, and looking at it as something that's a breakdown on an individual, that we look at it as part of just one of the core elements that we have to pay attention to and create energy towards, so that we're a little bit more robust and have a little more resilience when something like that happens.
Yeah,
Angela, your thoughts? Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think the pandemic crisis always reveals things to us. It opened a lot of people's eyes, systems level, not just individual level, but systems level eyes to the importance of mental health, the importance of well-being, that it isn't a nicety, that it's a necessity, and that we're going to suffer not only individually, but as a culture, as a company, as a community, if we don't address it. What I think we still have to learn, and I'm hoping that we are continuing to explore, is being truly well is a complex issue. It is not black and white. It is not going to be cured with bubble baths and deep breathing. That those are parts of things, but without understanding the complexity that in wellness and true well-being embodies the scope of our physical, our mental, our spiritual, our financial, our intellectual health. And that is not a simple, that's not a simple like program. And you can't order that online and implement it. So I'm hoping that we continue the journey and the research and the work necessary to address complex issues. Because one of the things that I've learned over time as a researcher in other areas is that just because the issue is complex doesn't mean the solution has to be complex. That sometimes the most complex issues can be addressed with simple conscious actions. And so that takes turning our common sense into commonplace and common practice. So I think there's still a long ways to go, but awareness, you can't control something you're not aware of. So I'm grateful that we are now not just in the fringe, like, oh, that's just such a nice, warm, fuzzy thing, like this emotional stuff is like, no, this is the issue. So
Thank you. Well, and just to add to that, to both of you, from my perspective, coming from Gaggle and kind of seeing with all of, we're in over 1,500 districts around the country, and we support over 5.8 million students at this point. And the amount of positive energy that we saw with educators and district leaders and kids around the country trying to get through and survive and thrive over the last couple of years has really been very positive. I mean, I know I started off this webinar about, how we have seen a very high self-harm and suicide ideation rate, the highest ever that we've seen, but we've also seen a lot of collaboration and group care. And I think that's the case, not just in education, but generally speaking. I feel like all of us as a group of humanity has tried to help each other. And I think looking on the bright side, that's one positive thing that we can look at from what's happened over the last couple of years. And let's take that into the next year. Right. And so that kind of brings me to the next question, which made me think of that. The question is, I did mention about the highest level of suicide ideation alerts ever that we have seen in the past year at Gaggle. And, generally speaking, you hear about this in studies and research across the country in different places. Is this true? I'm going to direct this first to you, Dr. Lisa. Do you see that in your practice, or just in everything with regards to adults, with regards to educators? Are you seeing a higher incidence of depression, struggling, and that, issues around that?
I am, and it's scary in my world because you don't know whether or not the ideation moves into an actionable event. And with adults, I think what is striking to me is that the pandemic hit them in the education space specifically. So I have a cache of teachers that I've kind of bubbled around and tried to help through the pandemic. But what I've noticed in my work and talking with you all and looking at the statistics is that this is a group that was looked to not only to figure out a way to transition an educational system overnight onto an online platform in order to deliver it in new ways that they had never done before, but also had to take in all of the vitriol of the parents and the disappointment and all of that at the same time. And I think that there was a bit of hopelessness and kind of the death of a thousand paper cuts in the clinical world that they had to get through. And I think that they're still healing from that, and they need to still heal from that. And I think that we all need to have a moment of grace and understand that we are trying to figure out what the new normal is. And I think that a lot of people lost a lot of their own kind of confidence. They lost their own ability to feel competent. And that leads into those feelings of depression and hopelessness, which can lead into those suicidal ideations. So it's really kind of, you can't tiptoe around it, and you have to kind of address it directly. But it also is okay to talk about it in the sense that it happens. Like, people have those thoughts in their mind. It doesn't mean that you're going to do it, but you need to really understand that this is a pretty loud warning shot across your bow that you're struggling, and that society is struggling, and that you're taking on that energy.
Thank you. I just put in the chat, everyone. Just so
Great.
everybody has it. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline just launched a couple of weeks ago. Their 988 number. Just everybody should know about that. So
Yeah.
I just put that in there. Angela, do you want to add to that at all, or?
Yeah, I just want to, it's more of a closing thought, is that when we look at trauma, one of the things that keeps coming up is we heal best in relationships where we feel seen and heard and valued and respected. And if you look at the underlying core of why these upticks in these trends, and dig it down to the most common denominator, those individuals didn't feel one of those things or all of those things. They did not feel seen. They did not feel heard. They did not feel valued. And the simplest gift and the greatest, most profound gift that we can give to another human being is letting them know that we see them, that we hear them, that we are there, that we validate their now, and that we respect their process of getting to the next most hopeful state. In essence, that they matter, and to not underestimate those words, those intentions. And it happens in glances, it happens in moments, it happens in micro seconds, where we have the power every single day to make another human being feel like they matter. And so that is our charge, that is our challenge. And the beautiful part of that is, in doing that, in showing up in that way for other people, and it doesn't have to be just people we know intimately, it can be a complete stranger, that we are actually increasing our own happiness, our own wellness, our own ability to show up differently in the world. And so the benefit is profound. And I just want you to know, and Dr. Lisa and Paget, that you matter. Having this conversation matters. Everybody that showed up today, if you take one thing away, you showing up is a big deal. And we see you and we hear you, and we are grateful that you're a part of our community.
Well, thank you, Angela. That's a wonderful way to sort of tie this up. I appreciate that. So I'm just going to quickly, I know we're kind of at the top of the hour, but I just want to go back to show you all some resources to follow up with. So we will be sending out the slides, like I said at the beginning. Note, when you get the slides, these are all live links to different resources for you, various different blogs from Gaggle, how to reach out to Lisa and Angela on their social media and various websites. And, certainly we encourage that, as well as, reach out to Gaggle. We will be sending you in the next little while, a survey to please tell us what you think of this webinar. We're always trying to improve what we're doing. So we would love it if you could just answer a couple of questions there. And then, thank you, Lisa and Angela, for this very thoughtful and deep conversation about how we can really help each other. And let's really think about everything we said today, how we can help each other and support each other, grant grace, and really continue, I use that word very purposefully, to build hope this coming year. Okay, so with that, I will say thank you all very much. Thank you, Lisa and Angela. Thank you to all the educators joining either today or listening afterwards asynchronously. We much appreciate you, and good luck with this coming school year. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank
Take
you.
care.